Assistant manager Yoon Sarah had gathered all her office colleagues to make an important announcement. She informed them that she would be resigning from her position due to her upcoming marriage and expressed her gratitude, thanking everyone for everything. Her sudden declaration left the entire office in shock. Many of the colleagues voiced their dismay, telling her that they had grown so close to her over time and that it was truly unfortunate to see her go. They asked her to keep in touch after leaving. Sarah, smiling politely, wished everyone good health and began walking out of the office. Behind her, one of the male colleagues, Inchel, stood frozen, wanting to say something but hesitating. A moment later, he turned back to his desk and resumed work. He started calling clients, explaining that their reservation dates were overlapping and needed adjustment. The flood of calls from the counseling department added to the chaos. Amidst this, the team leader stormed over to him, shouting furiously. She reminded him that she had clearly instructed him to keep the tabs open on the payment form and demanded to know why he couldn't get anything right. Inchel thought to himself that the team leader was nothing short of a psychotic demon. This shouting, this aggressive scolding was nothing new. It was always like this, and the only reason he had managed to endure this toxic work life was because of his one-sided love for assistant manager Yoon Sarah. Now, that very woman had resigned. The team leader snapped him out of his thoughts by ordering everyone to get back to their respective places. It was time to work. But Inchel stopped her and said that he had something to say. She raised an eyebrow and asked if something was wrong. Inchel informed her that he, too, was planning to resign. The team leader reacted with disbelief and frustration, questioning if he was joking. She reminded him that it hadn't even been that long since assistant manager Yoon Sarah left. Standing there quietly, Inchel reflected to himself that the only reason he had joined this company was to see Sarah. But even quitting wouldn't change anything now. He later returned home and sat down with a beer, muttering that the resignation only made his sadness worse. If he had known it would end this way, he thought he should have just confessed his feelings. For an entire year, he had silently watched her, his heart pounding every time he was near her. Was this really love? Surely this was one-sided love. He often questioned whether his feelings for her had ever been real. One evening, he found himself sitting at a restaurant with a friend, recounting the same story yet again. His friend, clearly tired of hearing it, asked how many times Inchel was going to repeat the same tale. He pointed out bluntly that Inchel had never even dated her. Inchel's thoughts drifted again to a moment he had fantasized about many times. He imagined a scenario in which they were alone together, working overtime, and he would confess to her while offering her something meaningful. That fantasy sparked a memory from the past. In a flashback, Inchel recalled a day at work when he had approached assistant manager Yoon Sarah with the intention of confessing. He had started by telling her that she must be exhausted from working overtime. As he offered her a drink, he said she should enjoy it while she worked. Sarah responded warmly, saying he didn't have to bring it, but she appreciated it and would enjoy it. At that moment, Inchel had felt it was the perfect opportunity to confess. His heart was pounding, but just as he was about to speak, he panicked and changed the subject, blurting out that he needed to organize a list and had to leave. He turned and walked away, kicking himself internally. Back in the present, he sat in his room, still feeling weighed down by depression. Then suddenly, a message popped up on his phone. It was from Yoon Sarah, a private message completely out of the blue. He stared at the screen, surprised. She wrote that she had heard he quit the company too. She also expressed her gratitude toward him, saying that if it weren't for him, enduring her time at the company would have been incredibly difficult. She told him that, though he may not have known it, he had been like a beacon of light for her during that time. She added that, although they might not meet again, she wished him happiness. Reading those words, Inchel sat in stunned silence. A beacon of light. He wondered what exactly about him made her feel that way. He couldn't recall even having a proper conversation with her. And what did she mean by, "We cannot meet anymore"? The message left him with a swirl of emotions, questions, and a bittersweet ache for a connection that might have been, but never was. Inchel had gone to visit a priestess to explain everything that had been happening. But instead of giving him the clarity he was seeking, the priestess immediately began shouting at him. She scolded him loudly, asking if he had come all the way just to tell her that he had quit his job. She demanded if he even understood what he had done. Bewildered and confused, Inchel could only stare at her in disbelief, wondering what exactly she was talking about. He told her that he hadn't come to report his resignation. He simply wanted to understand what Sarah meant by her message. He explained that none of it made any sense to him unless someone spelled it out. But the priestess seemed even more frustrated, exclaiming that he had no idea what was truly happening. She declared that the company he worked at was filled with a heavy cloud of energy, and that his presence there had been essential. That made no sense to Inchel. Internally, he wondered what she was going on about. Out loud, he replied with a hesitant voice, telling her she must be misunderstanding the situation. After all, he was just a travel agent. But the priestess, unbothered by his confusion, closed her eyes and began murmuring mysteriously. She claimed there was a spider present, a symbolic one. She said that his appearance at the company had been a divine blessing from the skies, and now that he had failed to act in time, there would be no way out. Her tone turned grave as she declared that one of the women would die soon. As she continued performing some kind of ritual or magic, Inchel stood in stunned silence. He nervously asked who she meant, who was going to die, but she abruptly stopped him, insisting that he keep quiet and let her finish. According to her, the gods had spoken. There was still some fortune left in Sarah's destiny from her past life. That meant there was still one more chance for him. Without warning, the priestess smacked him across the head with the hand fan she had been holding. Inchel recoiled, clutching his head, and asked why she had hit him so suddenly. She casually responded that she had given him some spiritual energy and instructed him to make the most of it this time. Later that night, Inchel returned to his house and lay in bed, unable to sleep. Although the blow to his head hadn't really hurt, the strange sensation it left behind wouldn't go away. He couldn't shake the feeling. He had gone to see the priestess because he had heard she was renowned, but all she had done was mutter bizarre things about energy clouds and spiders. What was there to figure out now, anyway? Everything was already over. Resigned to his thoughts, he closed his eyes and decided to try sleeping. But just as he was drifting off, something strange happened. A flicker of odd lighting, or was it energy, seemed to come from the ceiling above him. He opened his eyes, puzzled. Something didn't seem right. He looked around the room and realized that it wasn't quite the room he had fallen asleep in. Somehow, the coffee pot he had thrown away years ago was back in its usual spot. The old wardrobe, which he had clearly gotten rid of, was standing right there. Everything looked exactly like his room from 3 years ago. His confusion deepened when he checked his phone. It wasn't his current phone. It was the old one he had used 3 years ago. More shockingly, the date on the screen matched his very first day at the company. He shut his eyes again, trying to make sense of it all, muttering that this had to be some kind of dream. But when he opened them again and saw the unchanged surroundings, something in him shifted. He sat up straight and murmured to himself, realizing that even if it was a dream, this was his chance. If it truly was the day he had joined the company, then it was also the day he would see Sarah again. With that thought burning in his chest, he sprang into action. He got ready as quickly as he could and rushed out toward the office, heart pounding with anticipation. He kept repeating to himself that if this really was his first day again, if time had truly turned back, then this was his opportunity to see her once more. And when he finally arrived at the office, there she was, Sarah, just like before. He stood before her, barely able to contain his excitement, overwhelmed by the surreal moment of being able to meet her all over again. Inchel greeted her with a polite smile, saying, "Good morning, Sarah Sasai." But Sarah looked at him strangely, her expression cautious and puzzled, as she asked whether she knew him or if he was mistaking her for someone else. It was at that moment Inchel realized that, of course, she didn't recognize him yet. To her, he was a stranger because from her perspective they were meeting for the first time. Trying to recover quickly, Inchel began to explain himself. He told her that before joining the company, he had taken time to memorize the names of all the employees in Team 1. He introduced himself as Bang Inchel, the new hire who would be starting work that day. Sarah responded with a neutral tone, acknowledging that he must be the new employee they were expecting. Just then, another woman approached them. Her name was Huang Sui. She walked up to Sarah and asked whether she had arrived, then curiously inquired who the person standing next to her was. Sarah replied that the man beside her was a new hire on their team and encouraged Sui to support him well. Sui replied obediently, addressing Sarah as Chief, and then turned her attention to Inchel. Sui tilted her head slightly and noted that it was a bit odd. Usually, new hires were introduced by the manager. Inchel felt embarrassed, realizing that he might have overstepped. He thought to himself that of course Sarah would be weirded out if someone she didn't know acted overly familiar. He may have misjudged how to approach her in this altered timeline. Nonetheless, Sui offered to introduce herself before anyone else. She told him that her name was Huang Sui, and that she had joined the company about 6 months ago. She added that she would soon be promoted to the position of advisor. As she led him inside the office, she explained that although people often thought a travel agency would be laid back and carefree, she took the relationship between supervisors and subordinates very seriously, and she expected the same from him. She confirmed his name again, and then said she would begin introducing him to the rest of the office. Sui gave him a heads up, warning that the company had a large number of female employees, and it would be risky for him if he approached any of them with questionable intentions. Inchel nodded in agreement, though internally, he was surprised by how assertive Sui was acting toward him on his very first day, especially since, in the timeline he remembered, she had only been working there for 6 months. She began the introductions by pointing to a woman and saying that this was assistant manager Su Yeju, the person in charge of planning all the company trips. Yeju gave him a quick, dry glance and commented that he must be the new hire. Without waiting for a response, she added that she was a bit busy and then walked away. Inchel noted to himself that Yeju hadn't changed at all. Still blunt and unbothered, just as he remembered. Sui also remarked that assistant manager Su was always busy. As Inchel continued scanning the office, he found himself thinking that this truly was the same team one he had worked with for 3 years. The familiarity was uncanny. Then, Yoon Sarah formally introduced herself. She told him that she was the head of marketing and that her name was Chief Yoon Sarah. She greeted him briefly while still working on her computer, her eyes barely leaving the screen. Sui turned to her and remarked that she seemed especially busy that day. Inchel, however, noticed something that troubled him. Sarah had greeted him without even making eye contact. That wasn't like her. Even in a dream, it felt off. But then he remembered what the priestess had told him. The gods had said there was still some good fortune from her previous life, and that he had been given another chance. He wondered if this was it. Was this the second chance the priestess had mentioned? If so, he resolved to do his best. He nodded slightly to himself, muttering that it was time to try again, and this time he'd do better. Later, during lunch, he went to Sarah's office carrying a drink. She looked exhausted and asked him what it was. He replied that it was a vanilla latte, her favorite. He remembered clearly that she used to enjoy drinking them. He gently encouraged her to drink it, saying it might help ease her fatigue. Internally, he hoped this small gesture would leave a positive impression on her, but her response wasn't what he expected. She stared at the cup and told him to take it back. Startled, he asked her what she meant. Her voice rose as she firmly repeated her words, demanding that he take the drink back immediately. Embarrassed and confused, he grabbed the mug again and apologized, his mind spinning. That was not the reaction he had anticipated. Unbeknownst to him, Sarah stood there processing the moment. A question stirred in her mind. How had he known she liked vanilla lattes? Meanwhile, Sui had been watching the entire interaction from a distance. Irritated, she thought to herself how unfair it seemed. She was the one who had been teaching him how to work all day, yet he brought coffee to the chief instead. Walking up to him, Sui instructed Inchel to open Excel. He looked at her blankly and asked what she meant. She repeated herself more firmly this time, telling him to open Excel. There were long lists to manage and plenty of work that required using the software. She added that the new price tables for the vacation packages had just arrived, and it was time to organize them. Inchel got to work immediately, collecting the data and editing the charts. After a while, he asked if there was anything else he needed to do. Watching him work, Sui grew visibly confused. She hadn't expected him to be this skilled. In fact, she found herself wondering how he was even better than her. Sui told Inchel that he didn't need to do anything else for the time being. It seemed like he was quite good at his work. Hearing that, Inchel thought to himself with a slight smirk that of course he was good at it. She had nagged him about Excel for 3 whole years in the past, so it was only natural that he had mastered it by now. Still, Sui wasn't entirely ready to shower him with praise. She warned him not to get too satisfied just because he had handled one task well. He responded respectfully with a yes, Sunbae. She then reminded him that there would be a company dinner that night, a welcome party for the new hires, and he had to attend and join the rest of the team. He nodded enthusiastically, visibly excited. Later that night, the entire office team was gathered around a long dinner table, plates of food and bottles of soju spread out across it. Everyone was enjoying themselves. Inchel, ever mindful, offered pork cheek to the department head and told him it was something he liked. The department head chuckled in surprise, asking how the new hire knew his preference. Inchel responded smoothly, saying that pork cheek was a signature food of the area, and a man like the department head would naturally be familiar with the local delicacies. The older man laughed, clearly impressed with Inchel's attentiveness. Watching the exchange, Sui thought to herself that she really liked this guy. She hoped Inchel would stay with the company for a long time. In her mind, he wasn't just a diligent worker. He also had a way of reading the room, setting the mood, and making everyone feel comfortable. At one point during the dinner, Inchel offered a glass of soju to Sui, encouraging her to have a drink. He mentioned that she preferred soju over beer. She looked at him in confusion, asking how he knew that, especially when it was their first day meeting each other. It didn't make sense to her. Internally, Inchel panicked a little, realizing he had slipped. He thought she was close to figuring out something was off. But outwardly, he kept his composure and told her that he'd simply noticed she hadn't touched the beer all night. So he made a guess. Then he quickly shifted the topic, saying that it wasn't important at the moment. They should just enjoy a drink as co-workers. The table erupted into cheerful chatter as they clinked glasses and continued drinking. Sui kept glancing at Inchel, her curiosity deepening. To her, he was an intriguing person. Someone who seemed clumsy at first glance, the type who might take a while to adjust. But he turned out to be a highly diligent worker who handled everything effortlessly. In fact, around people, he became a completely different person. She couldn't help but feel a growing interest in him. Meanwhile, Inchel felt a quiet satisfaction as he observed the warm and lively atmosphere around the table. Those 3 years he had previously spent in the company weren't wasted after all. Creating this kind of mood now came naturally to him. Encouraged by his success so far, he thought that he would now smoothly make his way over to sit beside Sarah and speak with her. But before he could, Sarah stood up from her seat and addressed the department head, informing him that she would be leaving first. Inchel's heart sank in a wave of panic. This wasn't what he had expected. He silently thought to himself that she couldn't just leave like that. The department head checked his watch, agreed that it was getting late, and told Chief Yoon to get back home safely. He thanked her for the enjoyable meal they had shared. Sarah smiled and said goodbye to everyone, promising to see them the next day. With that, she left. Inchel remained seated, stunned and a bit disappointed that Sarah had left so early. He thought to himself that he hadn't even gotten the chance to say a single word to her. Everything he prepared and hoped for seemed to fall flat in that moment. He continued engaging with the team, offering drinks and trying to keep up the cheerful mood. He presented another glass to the department head, but he couldn't help but think to himself that the department head's favorite wasn't Sui. It was clearly Sarah. His mind wandered again, filled with frustration. One of the co-workers turned to Inchel and asked if he was any good at singing. The question embarrassed him, catching him off guard. He gave a nervous smile, unsure how to respond. 3 hours later, the dinner was wrapping up. Inchel stood up and began saying his goodbyes to everyone. He made sure to respectfully address the department head, wishing him a safe journey home, and told everyone he'd see them again tomorrow. After his polite farewells, he found himself walking alone. Everyone else had either left or was gathering their things. Only Sui remained behind with him. He turned to her and said softly, "Sunbae, I'll be heading out now." He began walking away, feeling a weight of disappointment in his chest. After everything he'd done that evening, he hadn't managed to exchange even a single meaningful word with Sarah. All that effort, and it still felt like nothing had changed. But then, just as he was about to leave, Sui called out to him. She told him that they hadn't had a proper chance to talk yet. She suggested that the two of them go for another round of drinks together. Hearing that, Inchel stopped in his tracks, startled. Her words caught him completely off guard. He stood there, surprised, trying to make sense of what she really meant by that. Inchel agreed to the invitation, and the two of them headed to a quiet bar nearby for another round of drinks. As they settled into their seats, Sui raised her glass with a relaxed smile, remarking that drinks like "Yes, like a cloud" were always the best. Inchel, sitting across from her, watched her with quiet curiosity. He analyzed the moment in disbelief. Was this really Hwang Sui being so easygoing and open? It felt strangely different from the person he had known for years. After they clinked glasses, she picked up the bottle again and offered to pour the next round, saying it was her turn now. He blinked, still surprised by how casual everything felt. But before he could say anything, she told him to stop. He immediately asked what she meant, apologizing without understanding what had gone wrong. Sui let out a soft sigh and told him that since they were the same age, he didn't need to speak to her so formally or distant. She encouraged him to speak comfortably with her and not act so cold. Inchel thought to himself that this side of her so open and approachable was something he never would have imagined. She continued, telling him that if he was going to be part of the company, he should start behaving like a real team member. She reminded him again to stop speaking so stiffly. He nodded quickly, correcting himself mid-sentence from, "Yes, Sunbae," to a more casual, "All right." Sui poured him another drink and added, with a tinge of emotion, that if he was going to join the team, he should have come earlier. Her voice softened as she shared a bit of her own experience, how hard it had been for her when she first started. She admitted that it had been lonely, especially since there was no one around her age to talk to freely. Listening to her speak so honestly made Inchel view her in a different light. For the first time, he wondered whether, if he had made an effort to approach her more actively in the past, they might have gotten along better. The thought lingered with him as he looked at her across the table. Still, he smiled and raised his glass again, saying that what mattered now was the present. They were there together, so they should enjoy the drink. They both cheered and clinked their glasses, sharing a quiet moment of warmth in the noisy bar. After several drinks, the two of them stepped out into the cold night air. Inchel wrapped his coat tighter and commented on how chilly it had gotten. Then he asked about the bill, wondering how much it had come to. Sui brushed it off with a smile, telling him it was around $50, but she had already paid. Since she was his sunbae, it was only natural for her to take care of it, at least this much. Rather than heading home right away, she suggested they take a short walk to sober up a little before parting ways. He agreed, and the two of them wandered quietly together under the streetlights. At first, Inchel believed they were simply taking a stroll around the neighborhood or through a nearby park. But as time passed, he found himself blinking in disbelief. Somehow, their walk had ended with both of them standing in front of a motel. The situation had unfolded so unexpectedly, it barely felt real. Even once they were inside, he couldn't quite process what was happening. His thoughts raced. He never imagined this would be possible. He was now alone with Hwang Sui, in a setting that felt almost surreal. Sui, slightly tipsy and speaking freely, started teasing him gently. She complained that he was the one who had made her start thinking about the yoga sessions. Her words were disjointed and playful, but carried an unmistakable tension. She muttered that she didn't understand why she was acting like this earlier in the evening. She had been composed, but now it felt different. Inchel sat beside her, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of the moment. He kept thinking to himself that this couldn't be real. Despite his lack of experience, he was now in this unexpected situation, and with none other than Sui. She mentioned that it would be embarrassing if she was the only one trying to lead the yoga session, nudging him to join her too. Inchel looked flustered, admitting quietly that it was actually his first time doing yoga. That surprised her. She turned to him with wide eyes and asked if he was serious. She had assumed, based on the way he carried himself earlier, that he was familiar with it, maybe even experienced. She confessed that she had been genuinely impressed and had thought he dated a number of women before. Laughing at her own misunderstanding, she muttered that this was insane. What was she doing here with someone so innocent? But after a pause, she added that since things had already gone this far, she couldn't let it end awkwardly. Inchel smiled faintly and said that he was happy to be joining her for the session. Despite the bizarre circumstances, both of them seemed to find comfort in each other's company. Their connection felt genuine, and for a fleeting moment, they let themselves enjoy the unexpected bond that had formed between them. During the game, Inchel turned to her and asked softly if he had done something wrong. Sui responded with a teasing tone, telling him that yes, he had done something very wrong. But since she was enjoying playing the game with him, she would let it slide and forgive him. After the game ended, the two of them began drinking together. Inchel remarked that the drinks at the motel were surprisingly good. As she watched him sipping her favorite drink, she couldn't help but protest. She told him to stop drinking it, saying that she had wanted to drink that one herself. Half joking and half exhausted, she told him to come lie down and hand the drink over, adding that she didn't have any more strength left in her body. Inchel glanced at her, uncertain. He wasn't sure if, at that moment, he was supposed to hold her or simply stay where he was. She appeared to want more comfort, more ease, as if she were slowly letting her guard down. Curious, she shifted the conversation and asked him something that had been on her mind. More importantly, how had he started working at their company? He replied casually, confirming that it was indeed Zoe Travel Agency. He explained that he wasn't entirely sure how it happened, He had simply submitted his resume and been accepted almost immediately. He admitted that he found it rather strange himself, since his qualifications weren't particularly impressive. Puzzled him. As he thought about it more, Inchel realized something. This was the first time he had ever shared such a personal conversation with Sui, despite having known her for nearly 3 years. That thought lingered in his mind as he turned the question back to her, asking how she had ended up at the same company. She answered lightly, saying it was nothing special, just something along the lines of a special employment route. That response surprised him. He looked at her and asked with disbelief if she had been scouted. That, to him, sounded incredible. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing and that things had simply turned out that way. He then commented that if he thought about it, there were a lot of strange things about their company. There weren't many employees, yet they operated out of a huge building, and the internet connection there was exceptionally good. Sui seemed caught off guard by that observation and looked at him curiously. She asked how he could know all that on his first day at work. He immediately grew flustered and tried to explain himself, insisting that it wasn't what it sounded like. He clarified that he was merely saying the company seemed nice. He didn't actually know anything for sure. Laughing awkwardly, he tried to ease the tension. Inchel smiled and suggested they play another round of the game. Sui blinked and asked if she wasn't already tired after just finishing a session. But she seemed excited, and with a grin, he admitted that he wanted to try playing more too. Sui could hardly believe what she had just heard. He genuinely wanted to play more games, despite the fact that they had already played quite a lot. She reminded herself that it was still only the first day since they had met under these circumstances. Her thoughts began to drift, tangled with confusion and curiosity, when Inchel suddenly said, almost as if reading her mind, that he knew it was impossible, right? She hesitated before responding, asking him to wait a moment and let her think. But in the pause that followed, her mind wandered again. After all, wasn't she the one who had been the most eager to try out all the games earlier? Her own excitement had started everything. Inchel, puzzled by her reaction, asked what she was even trying to say. Meanwhile, he found himself overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. He thought to himself that this couldn't be real. It felt too dreamlike. There was no way something like this could happen again. A quiet conviction crept into his thoughts. Everything would return to normal once he woke up. It would be his familiar room again, just as always. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep, convinced it was all just a strange dream. But when morning came and he opened his eyes, he was stunned to find that he was still in the motel room, not at home. Panic slowly set in. His mind raced with confusion. Was he seriously still in the same motel from the day before? Nothing made sense. He wondered aloud what had happened and whether this wasn't all supposed to be a dream. But if it wasn't a dream, then what was it? He began searching the area frantically, looking around for Sui. Her absence puzzled him even more. Where had she gone? Picking up his phone, he considered the possibility that this might truly be his reality now. And if that were the case, he figured he'd better get going, to work. Determined to make sense of it all, he quickly got ready and headed to the company. Upon arriving, he saw Sui there, and her outfit was exactly the same as it had been the previous day. That single detail hit him hard. It confirmed everything. They had actually done a yoga session together. It wasn't a hallucination. Approaching her with hesitation, he asked if she had left first the night before. Sui, keeping her professional demeanor, reminded him that they were at work now and that he should speak more respectfully. Without giving him a chance to respond, she turned and walked away. Inchel stood frozen for a moment, bewildered. What had just happened? Had he said something wrong? Or was it just because they were in the office now where things had to be more formal? Still trying to wrap his head around the strangeness of it all, he muttered to himself that this definitely wasn't a dream. Nothing made sense, and the only conclusion he could draw was that he had somehow traveled 3 years back in time. Then, like a sudden jolt, another realization struck him. If this truly was his new reality, then did that mean he had a chance to get closer to Sarah? With that thought, he turned and began walking toward her. Sarah was sitting calmly at her desk, focused on her work. Inchel found himself struggling with yet another dilemma. This time, it involved Hwang Sui. He kept thinking about how he had gotten involved with her, how they had done yoga together just the day before. It had been his first experience doing something like that, and while it had left an impression on him, his heart still firmly belonged to Sarah, the woman he had always loved. Torn between the two, he asked himself what he was supposed to do now. Could he really just go out with Sui? but ignoring her entirely didn't feel right either. Still, if he pursued anything with Sui, he feared it might be over with Sarah. The situation was far more difficult than he could manage, and he continued thinking helplessly, trying to figure out what path to take. While he was lost in thought, Sarah approached and tried to get his attention. However, he didn't respond, too absorbed in his inner conflict to notice her presence. Observing him quietly, Sarah noticed the tension written all over his face. She wondered if it was because of her. Was it because she had been cold toward him the previous day? The way she had acted had been out of shock, but now she regretted it. Feeling guilty, she decided to take care of her assigned payments first and left without saying anything. As she walked away, the documents and files she was carrying suddenly slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. Inchel immediately stepped in to help her, apologizing and blaming his clumsiness for not reacting sooner. As they picked up the papers together, Sarah mentioned that she thought some of the data might be missing. Inchel sifted through the files and pointed out that she needed to attach the statistics from the previous year so that they could be properly compared with the current figures. Sarah listened to his words in stunned silence, taken aback by the clarity of his suggestion. She asked him what he meant, still in disbelief. Inchel, realizing what he had just done, panicked. He hadn't intended to step out of line or speak as if he held more authority. He had spoken without even realizing it, and now it might have seemed inappropriate. Trying to recover from his slip-up, he responded awkwardly that it was nothing, telling her not to worry about it. But Sarah looked at him directly and said his name Inchel. He replied hesitantly, yes. To his surprise, she thanked him sincerely for pointing it out. Meanwhile, team leader and Hiren from personnel and management had been reviewing all the files and data. She commended Sarah, saying that the information was organized well and easy to understand, with no issues to be found. She praised her work, stating clearly that she had done an excellent job. Sarah thanked the team leader respectfully and, with a sense of relief, thought to herself how fortunate she was. Team leader Hiren was known for her meticulous standards and rarely handed out compliments so freely. It was reassuring to have received one. Later, Sarah bought a drink from the cafe and placed it gently on Inchel's desk. He was deeply focused on his work at the time, and the gesture caught him completely by surprise. Startled, he looked up and asked what it was. Sarah replied calmly, saying it wasn't anything big, just a coffee from the first floor. She added that things had gone smoothly earlier thanks to his help. Because the weather was so warm, she had ordered it iced and asked if that was okay with him. He thanked her earnestly, saying he would truly savor it. She also took the opportunity to apologize for how she had behaved the previous day. Curious, he asked why she felt the need to say sorry. Sarah explained that he had been nothing but kind and had genuinely tried to connect with her, but she had misunderstood everything and had reacted too sensitively. She admitted that she had judged him too quickly and suggested that from now on, they try to get along. Inchel's face lit up with excitement, and he agreed happily. As he took a sip of the coffee, he noted with delight that it was the vanilla latte Sarah liked so much. Somehow, that small detail made it feel even more meaningful to him. He couldn't explain why, but the gesture made him incredibly happy. From a distance, Sui was watching the entire exchange. Her expression darkened, and her eyes filled with quiet anger. She quickly walked to the restroom, her thoughts churning with frustration. Seeing Inchel smiling so brightly with the chief made her wonder if, to him, she had just been a temporary distraction, a way to pass time. Back at the office, Inchel continued to focus on his work and performed impressively. As the workday came to a close, the department head announced that he would be leaving first. Before leaving, he told Inchel to wrap things up and head home soon as well. Inchel nodded and replied with a respectful, "Okay, sir," and the department head turned back to the office, wishing everyone a safe return home before departing. Once he had finished all his work, Inchel looked around the office, thinking that he should at least say goodbye to Sarah before he left. As he scanned the room, he wondered where she had gone. Just then, Sui appeared and confronted him, asking if he was already planning to go home. She pointed out that, as his superior, she still had work to do and reminded him there were many tasks left to complete. Without waiting for his response, she instructed him to follow her. They both walked into the storage room together. Not far away, Sarah noticed the two of them entering and paused. She found herself confused. It was already time to leave. Why had Inchel gone into the storage room with Sui? Inside, Sui pointed at the disorganized stacks of books and papers. She explained that these were pamphlets from the last event and that the place had become a complete mess. Inchel asked what they should do about it, and she simply told him to clean it up. She advised him to bring everything out of the storage room and to make sure he did a thorough job. After finishing her work, Sui stepped out of the storage room and ran into Sarah, who was just standing nearby. She addressed her calmly, saying, "Chief, you haven't left yet?" Sarah responded that she was about to leave and told Sui she had done well today. Sui returned to her desk, resumed her office tasks, and glanced at the clock. It was already quite late. She wondered if Inchel had managed to finish yet. Curiosity got the better of her, and she walked back toward the storage room to check. Upon entering, she was utterly shocked to find that Inchel had completed all the cleanup work perfectly. She stood there, surprised and speechless. Inchel looked visibly proud of the work he had completed. Standing amid the now tidy space, he remarked that he had finished cleaning everything up and had even gone the extra mile to sort the materials. However, his confidence was short-lived. Suze stood nearby, shocked by what she saw. She couldn't believe that a new hire like him had managed to do all of it so quickly, and properly at that. Her initial surprise quickly gave way to rising irritation. The more she looked, the more her frustration bubbled to the surface. He noticed the sudden shift in her expression and asked cautiously if something was wrong. In a sharp tone, she asked him whether he had organized the materials according to location. Before he could respond properly, she struck him across the arm, not harshly but firmly, and scolded him for lacking common sense. She reminded him that the materials had to be sorted by location, not by any arbitrary method. Caught off guard, Inchel stumbled over his words, apologizing and trying to explain. He mentioned that Sunbae had once done it a certain way, and added that Chief Sarah had already left the office. He hadn't seen her anywhere and assumed she was gone. Sui immediately questioned why he was asking about Sarah. He replied calmly that he had simply wanted to greet her before leaving. Since he hadn't seen her around, he thought she must have gone home already. Sui brushed off his explanation and pointed out that it was quite late. Without warning, she grabbed him by the collar. Inchel froze, stunned by her sudden and aggressive behavior. Internally, she was seething. The way he so casually mentioned Sarah had set her off. Her thoughts churned bitterly. "This is making me furious. What does he even think of me?" In a voice laced with emotion, Sui asked him directly how he could still be thinking about the chief, even in this situation. Didn't anything that had happened between them yesterday matter to him at all? Inchel stared at her, caught completely off guard. His mind raced. What is she talking about? No, it's not like that. So then a strange thought crept in. Could she be jealous of Sarah right now? Is that what this is? Felt surreal. A woman as beautiful as Sui, acting jealous because of someone like him? He quickly shook his head, trying to shrug off the thought. What was he even thinking? Meanwhile, Department Head Sue, who was on his way home, suddenly remembered that he had left behind some important materials he had planned to review that evening. Realizing the urgency, he turned his car around and headed back toward the company, muttering to himself that he had no choice but to return to the office. Back inside the building, things had taken a strange turn. Despite the workplace setting, Sui had dragged Inchel into doing a yoga session with her again. He was nervous, glancing around anxiously and whispering that it wasn't appropriate. They were at work, after all. What if someone saw them? Sui dismissed his concerns with a relaxed tone, assuring him that everyone had already left and there was no need to worry. Besides, she added with a smirk, it wasn't as if he disliked doing yoga with her. Reluctantly, Inchel followed along, the two of them continuing with their stretches in the quiet storage room. But suddenly he stopped mid-pose and looked around, clearly startled. He insisted that he had heard something, that someone was in the office. Sui didn't take him seriously at first. She waved him off and accused him of making excuses just to avoid the session. But Inchel stood firm. His tone was serious now, and he said it wasn't an excuse. He was certain someone was really there. Just moments later, Sarah entered the storage room, her voice calm but pointed as she addressed them both. She told them that it was getting very late and that they should head home now. Inchel froze. Panic surged through him the moment he saw her standing there. The department head had been on his way home when he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten the flash drive containing the materials he was supposed to review. A wave of frustration swept over him as he realized that his trip had been a complete waste of time. With no choice but to retrieve the files, he turned his car around and headed back toward the company. quietly remarking to himself that it was urgent and unavoidable. Before their conversation could go any further, Sarah had suddenly collapsed without warning, losing consciousness. Inchel, who had been sitting nervously inside the storage room, had grown increasingly anxious. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to figure out what to do next. The fact that Sarah had seen them weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both in serious trouble. Once Sarah had regained her senses, her shock had quickly transformed into fury. She had begun scolding them, clearly appalled by what she had witnessed. Her voice, raised and trembling with disbelief, had carried a warning. What she had seen wouldn't be ignored, and both of them should prepare themselves for whatever consequences would follow. Inchel had never seen her so visibly angry. Later that evening, he returned to his home, gripped by panic and uncertainty. His mind couldn't stop replaying what had happened. He questioned what was to become of him now. The idea of punishment, discipline, or even dismissal crossed his mind, and it felt unbearable. What unsettled him most was the look Sarah had given him. A glare filled not just with disappointment, but with disgust. He couldn't recall ever seeing that expression from her before. To him, it felt like everything was already over. Whatever second chance he'd been granted had now completely slipped away. Lying on his bed in a haze of despair, he felt lost. His thoughts churned restlessly. He didn't know what to do or where to go from here. Morning eventually arrived, but it brought no relief. He lay still, dreading the idea of returning to work. He muttered to himself, questioning if he really had to go back, especially when being fired now felt inevitable. And yet, part of him figured that if termination was coming, he might as well face it head-on. As he reached for his phone to check the time, his eyes locked onto the date displayed on the screen. A rush of confusion and fear overwhelmed him as he stared in disbelief. The date hadn't changed. It was the same as his first day at the company. Panic set in as he questioned whether he was hallucinating. He began shouting in a mix of shock and frustration, loud enough that his neighbor banged on the wall, asking him to keep it down. He apologized quickly and tried to steady himself, but his thoughts were racing. If this was truly his first day again, had time reversed itself? Was it because of what had happened yesterday? None of it made sense, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to get back to the company immediately. Upon arriving, he was met by team leader and Hiren, who didn't bother hiding her disappointment. She remarked curtly that being late on his very first day wasn't a great look, and though it was impressive in its own way, it certainly wasn't something to be proud of. Inchel bowed his head and apologized sincerely, promising that it wouldn't happen again. He reminded himself that he had already been through this scenario once. With this second chance, he intended to avoid repeating his earlier mistakes. The team leader sighed, saying that under ordinary circumstances, she would have sent him home then and there. But since it was technically his first day again, she decided to overlook it. She then summoned Sarah and asked her to introduce Inchel to the rest of the staff and take responsibility for his onboarding. Sarah agreed calmly, showing no sign of remembering anything that had occurred the previous day. Inchel followed her through the office, feeling a wave of relief. It seemed that somehow the events of the day before had been erased. The weight he'd carried just hours earlier began to lift. Sarah had explained that the team leader had no patience for people who made excuses, and quietly remarked that he had handled the situation well. She then formally introduced herself as Yoon Sarah. The name echoed in his mind. It felt familiar, and yet distant, like he was being given a fresh start. It dawned on him that this really was a reset. She had no memory of their prior interaction. She introduced him next to assistant manager Soo Yeju, who welcomed him with polite professionalism. Inchel responded accordingly, and mentally noted how the setting, while familiar, carried subtle differences this time around. It was strange but also reassuring. Then he met Hwang Sui again. She introduced herself with composure, and Inchel responded with respectful formality. He realized then that whatever bond or tension had existed between them previously had been wiped clean. This too had been reset. Following that, Sarah brought him over to manager Yang Minu, who greeted him casually. Finally, she introduced him to department head Guak Sangdo, who acknowledged him briefly. After the round of introductions, Sarah remarked that the process was now complete. Returning to the main office space, both of them took their seats at their assigned desks. Sarah handed him a manual, instructing him to read it thoroughly and familiarize himself with the company's systems and policies. Inchel quietly nodded, beginning to understand just how profound this second chance really was. After receiving the manual, Inchel had turned to Sarah and expressed his gratitude, thanking her sincerely. He then shifted his focus to the computer and began working, but his mind quickly drifted elsewhere. The strangeness of his situation lingered heavily in his thoughts. The memory of the gaming session he had shared with Sui the day before resurfaced, and he began questioning whether that too had been erased in the reset. Had it really happened, or had it been undone along with everything else? He couldn't be sure, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. It seemed unlikely that a moment like that would present itself again. Yet, amid the confusion, another realization emerged. Sarah was no longer avoiding him. Her demeanor toward him had softened, and she was interacting with him naturally. That change brought a sense of relief, but at the same time, a flicker of regret surfaced in his mind when he thought about his relationship with Sui. As he tried to focus on his work, conflicting thoughts continued to swirl inside him. He wondered what might happen if, by chance, he and Sui were the last two remaining at the welcome party that night. Could something similar occur again? The mere possibility overwhelmed him. Guilt crept in as he chastised himself for even entertaining such thoughts. He muttered inwardly that he was trash. What was he thinking when Sarah was right there in front of him? Just then, Sui approached his desk, catching him completely off guard. She asked if he was struggling with anything, her voice cool but professional. The question jolted him back to reality. She reminded him that the manual had been uploaded in the shared files and instructed him to read through it thoroughly. If he truly wanted to make up for being late on his first day, then he needed to get serious and put in the effort. Her tone was firm, leaving no room for excuses. That night, the company held a welcome party to celebrate the new hire. The entire team had gathered, and the mood was light with casual conversations and drinks flowing freely. During the dinner, Inchel found himself presenting a dish pork cheek to the department head, noting that it was his favorite. The department head looked at him in surprise, clearly caught off guard. He questioned how a new employee could possibly know such a specific detail. Inchel replied smoothly, explaining that pork cheek was one of the signature dishes in the region. Internally, he was thinking that if he simply repeated the same steps as last time, perhaps he could recreate the moment he had shared with Sui. The possibility of getting another chance at that game tempted him, even as he tried to stay grounded. During the welcome party, Inchel had carefully approached Sui with a bottle of soju in hand. With a respectful yet casual gesture, he poured a glass for her, recalling that she preferred soju over beer. His expression was composed, but internally he was carefully mirroring each step from the previous timeline. He believed that if he followed the same path, the outcome might unfold in the same way again. Despite the quiet thrill building in his chest, he reminded himself that the one he truly had feelings for was Sarah. For hours later, the party had long since wound down. Inchel and Sui were now standing outside the beer station, the air slightly cooler and quieter under the dim streetlights. Sui, speaking with a light tone, mentioned that they hadn't really had a chance to talk properly during the party. She wondered aloud if they should go for another round of drinks, just the two of them. He nodded without hesitation, agreeing, and the two of them headed into a nearby bar. As they walked in, Inchel couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Everything was falling into place just as it had before. He felt confident now that the same chain of events would play out once again. If everything continued as it had, the night would end with them at the motel, playing games together. That idea alone sent a strange mix of pride and anticipation coursing through him. Eventually, they sat down and began playing a game together, just as they had previously. Inchel watched the scene unfold with an odd sense of déjà vu. Every detail, the lighting, her posture, even her hesitant laughter, matched the past so perfectly that it felt like he had stepped directly back into that moment. He found himself grinning subtly, almost amused by how precisely things were repeating. The fact that Sui was sitting across from him, showing the same bashful reactions as before, filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He likened the situation to using a cheat code. He already knew the outcome, and the sense of control was both surreal and thrilling. On the other side, Sui was watching him with a puzzled expression. Something about his playing style felt oddly familiar. It was as if he already knew her weak points in the game, where she would slip, how she would react. She began to question it in her mind, wondering if it was just coincidence or something more intentional. Inchel, watching her closely, found her confusion amusing. The next morning at the company, Inchel ran into Sui as soon as he arrived. He greeted her, slightly sternly reminding her that they were at work and she should speak respectfully. Internally, he reflected on his previous mistakes, realizing that last time he had been careless and not cautious enough in his behavior. Determined to do better this time, he resolved to be more careful. Despite his polite greeting, Sui ignored him and walked away without responding. Inchel thought to himself that if he focused properly today, perhaps he could finally improve his relationship with Sarah. Sitting down at his computer, he prepared himself to work diligently. He expected the day's routine to unfold similarly to before. He imagined Sarah would prepare the report again, but suspected it might be flawed, leading to a repeat of previous problems. Indeed, his prediction was accurate. Sarah soon pointed out that some essential data was missing. Inchel calmly suggested that she include statistics from the previous year to provide context and strengthen the report's quality. Sarah was impressed by his insight, and this encouraged Inchel to maintain a professional attitude throughout the day. He modestly told her it was just a thought he wanted to share in case it would help. She thanked him sincerely and went off to submit the report to the team leader. Inchel felt a quiet sense of pride, imagining that, just like last time, he might be rewarded with a vanilla latte. Everything seemed to be unfolding according to his hopes. But then, he noticed Sui watching both of them from a distance. A pang of concern hit him and he sighed inwardly, thinking, "Not again." Sui announced she was leaving and walked away. Inchel worried that if Sui became jealous again, as she had during the previous tense incident in the storage room, it could cause trouble. He promised himself he would do whatever it took to prevent that from happening again. Later, as the department head prepared to leave for the day, he wished everyone a safe journey home and said he would see them tomorrow. Inchel was filled with excitement and pride, believing he had finally shown Sarah his best side, and hoped he could leave without any awkwardness. But just then, Sui approached him unexpectedly and asked if he could help her with some urgent tasks. Despite feeling reluctant and questioning why she was involving him again, Inchel agreed. She led him toward the storage room and asked him to finish all the work there. Inchel hesitated and asked if it really had to be done immediately. Sui teased him playfully, accusing him of trying to avoid work like a typical new hire. He quickly denied the accusation but couldn't stop worrying. He feared that if things continued this way, the awkward incident they had shared before might repeat itself. Inchel firmly insisted there was no need to relive that situation again today. Sui smiled and said it would be better if they spent some quality time together. Just the two of them. Inchel was taken aback by her unexpected words and felt a rush of embarrassment, unsure how to respond. As they worked side by side in the storage room, Inchel found himself more aware of Sui's presence than usual. He noticed the way she glanced at him from time to time, her expression softer than before. The silence between them was charged with unspoken feelings and tension. Inchel's thoughts raced. He questioned whether Sui's behavior was jealousy, a desire for closeness, or something else entirely. His heart beat faster, and he struggled to focus on the tasks at hand. Sui broke the silence, laughing lightly at his awkwardness, telling him not to take things too seriously. Inchel smiled nervously, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't expected. The mundane work suddenly felt less tedious with her nearby. Inchel began to wonder if this was the start of a different kind of relationship, one where work, friendship, and something more personal could blend. He thought back to the gaming sessions, the subtle changes in how she addressed him, and her compliments. Inchel realized these moments weren't just casual or superficial. They hinted at a growing connection between them. He hoped that by being more attentive and careful, he could nurture this bond without causing misunderstandings or conflicts. As the evening wore on, the tasks in the storage room slowly neared completion. Inchel felt a sense of accomplishment but also a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a deep desire to understand what Sui truly felt. He resolved to be patient and attentive, knowing that building trust and friendship would take time. When they finally finished, Sui thanked him again, this time with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Inchel felt his heart swell with hope. As they parted ways that evening, he promised himself he would do his best to keep this fragile connection alive and growing. Inchel teased Sui, telling her that if she wanted him to do the extra work in the storage room, then he expected her to make him some ramen in return. He joked that since she had left early the previous day, she probably hadn't managed to fully cure her hangover. Inchel suggested that the task could wait until tomorrow, trying to lighten the mood and ease the tension between them. Embarrassed, he wondered aloud if he had overdone it during their gaming session the night before. Sui admitted she wasn't sure but agreed that there was no need to rush and it didn't have to be done right then. Unexpectedly, she invited him over to her place. Inchel was taken aback. He hadn't meant his words as a serious invitation, but Sui seemed to have accepted it warmly. She urged him to finish his work quickly if he was going to come over. He agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After they wrapped up their tasks, Inchel and Sui left the company together and got into a taxi. From a distance, Sarah was watching them quietly before turning away. Inchel thought about how Sarah might have been worried about him being alone. But it seemed Sui genuinely cared for him, a quality that he found unexpectedly endearing. During the taxi ride, they stopped at a convenience store to buy some drinks. Inchel asked whether her house was far, and Sui replied that it was quite close, they were almost there. Soon, they arrived outside her building. Sui invited him inside, and he stepped into her apartment for the first time. Looking around, he complimented her place, remarking on how gorgeous, clean, and pleasantly scented it was. Sui replied with a laugh, saying she might have tidied up more had she known he was coming, but admitted it was still a bit messy. She gestured for him to sit down, trying to put him at ease. Inchel felt a little uncertain, wondering whether it was appropriate to be in a girl's room, especially someone he was just getting closer to. He wasn't sure what to do next. Meanwhile, Sui felt a wave of nervousness wash over her, questioning why she had brought him home after everything that had happened earlier. She sighed to herself, thinking the mood had vanished now that he was here, and wondered what she had been thinking when she invited him over. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Sui asked if Inchel wanted to watch a movie, mentioning that she had Netflix. Inchel eagerly agreed and pointed to a movie he wanted to watch. Sui noted it was a melodrama and asked if that was his kind of film. She admitted she had wanted to watch it too but never had the chance. Inchel felt excited, thinking that watching a movie with a girl at her house was one of his dreams coming true. As the movie played, Sui soon admitted that it was boring and not really her type. Inchel, however, was deeply moved by the story. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he grew emotional. Sui noticed and asked if he was really crying. Inchel explained that the story was sad, about loving someone deeply but never being able to be with them, and he wondered how people who experience such painful love must feel. Sui thought to herself that he was being overly emotional for such a familiar storyline. She wondered which version of him was real, the sensitive one watching the movie or the more casual person she had seen before. Thinking about their interactions the previous day made her feel self-conscious and uncertain. Suddenly, Inchel noticed her mood shift and asked if something was wrong. He wondered if she was feeling hot or perhaps running a fever. Concerned, he checked her temperature and confirmed she did not have a fever. Sui playfully scolded him, calling him an idiot for worrying about a fever when watching the movie. Inchel teased her back, asking if she would be alright doing yoga 2 days in a row. Sui smiled slyly and asked what he planned to do next, keeping the atmosphere light despite their earlier tension. The evening continued with a mix of laughter, light teasing, and quiet moments where they both grew more comfortable with each other's presence. Inchel felt a growing warmth towards Sui. After that, the two of them started playing the game together. As they played, Inchel found himself wondering why they never seemed to get tired of gaming every day. To him, it always felt like a new and different experience each time. He was also particularly excited about the idea of playing near the window, as he believed that doing so would make the experience even more enjoyable. She was saying that she hadn't been prepared for that kind of yoga session. In response, he pointed out that she seemed to be enjoying it a lot, even though she claimed she wasn't. She found it strange that she might actually get excited by something like that, especially since there was no way to know if people below could see them, or if someone in the building across the way might be watching. At one point, she mentioned that she thought someone nearby was actually observing them. He began to wonder whether she was hinting that she wanted him to take things a step further. When she asked if he had heard what she just said, he told her that she shouldn't worry about other people. If anyone wanted to watch, he added, they could go ahead. It would be a shame if he were the only one who got to see. Regardless of everything they had said, both of them continued playing their game without stopping. Meanwhile, Su Yeju was sitting in a bar, drinking and thinking to herself that she was feeling bored. Her name was Su Yeju, and she worked as an assistant manager at a travel agency founded in the year 2000. While Yeju was sitting at the bar, drinking her beer quietly, her colleague from the company suddenly approached her. He asked if she had come alone and suggested that they drink together. Yeju replied that she had actually wanted to be alone that day. He tried to lighten the mood and told her not to be like that. He mentioned that he had been watching her for a while and that she had looked bored the entire time. He added that he thought he might be able to change that for her. Yeju laughed at his comment and responded with a playful, "Is that so?" He confidently said yes and encouraged her to have a drink with him. They raised their glasses and cheered together. As they drank, he was silently thinking to himself that women like her were all the same. It just took a bit of boldness and they would be ready for anything. Yeju poured more beer into his glass and encouraged him to keep drinking. He hesitated internally, wondering whether he should have another round. He was also puzzled by how fast she was drinking, noting to himself that it wasn't whiskey but still, the shots felt incredibly strong. As soon as he finished his second glass, she poured him another without hesitation. He kept thinking to himself that no matter what she did, she was still a woman, and wherever he went, he wouldn't lose his upper hand. But suddenly, everything around him began to blur, and he started to feel as if he was losing consciousness. When he eventually came to, he found himself in a motel room. His eyes were blindfolded. He panicked and pleaded for someone to remove the blindfold, begging, "Please, open my eyes." Yeju was sitting nearby and spoke coldly, telling him how pathetic he was. She reminded him of all the arrogant things he had said earlier about how he was going to train her. Yet now he couldn't even handle this. He kept begging her to open his eyes, but she continued speaking with clear disappointment. She said that if he had been more entertaining, maybe she would have played along longer, but this just wasn't going to work. When he asked her what she meant, she brushed it off, saying that the whole experience had been boring and that she had to leave.